train is going to be upwards of 110 miles per hour. In certain areas, it will slow down due to the natural curvature of the land, as well as man-made structures. For example, the city of Stuart, we've been told, I believe Rusty Roberts said in one of the public comments, that the train will slow down to 45 to 50 miles per hour in that particular area. At this time, we do not know how fast it's going to be traveling through the city of Vero Beach. What we do know is that there's no anticipated stops between Orlando and West Palm Beach, additional stops. Currently, the board, Indian River County Board of County Commissioners, is neutral on this issue of whether or not to support All Aboard Florida. The board has tasked the county attorney with hiring outside counsel to review the draft EIS report when it is released. The board appropriated $100,000 to hire counsel, and Dylan Reingold skillfully chose the law firm of Bryan Cave, BRYANCAVE. They have experience not only in railroad litigation, but also in the NEPA process, which is kind of the umbrella for the EIS report. When the draft EIS report is released, they will help us kind of evaluate the draft EIS and immediately be able to identify what are the strengths and weaknesses of the report so that we know how to address it in the comment period. Now, the comment period, we have a minimum of 45 days. Indian River County has asked for a 90-day comment period, so has numerous other government entities. All Aboard Florida has graciously asked for 75 days for the comment period. As of last week, the FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, does not know how much time it's going to give us.
I see.
So once that comment period does expire, whatever the number is, the comments will be reviewed by FRA and they will be incorporated into a final EIS statement, which will then be published, and we'll have 30 more days to comment. Again, it's really important that we all comment during this time period, because if we don't raise our concerns, we will lose the opportunity to raise the concern. So at the end of the 30 days, that second comment period expires, the FRA will incorporate those final comments, and they will release or publish what's called a decision of record. And that's the final agency action that we will go on. Now, I'm sure everyone's wondering, when's the draft EIS report going to be released? And simple answer is, we do not know. The county attorney's office does not know. The only people who may know are going to speak next, so I strongly encourage that you ask them, because I'm curious myself. While we are waiting for the draft EIS report to be released, what the county attorney's office is focusing on is the crossing agreements. We're analyzing the crossing agreements because we received in July a letter. It's a letter agreement which basically requests that All Aboard Florida be made a third-party beneficiary to these crossing agreements. Now, we have a number of concerns with this, as does the Public Works Department, which we'll be addressing in front of the board on August 19th. Brevard County also has received this letter, and they'll be addressing their concerns on August 19th, so that's certainly something to watch. One of the concerns that we have is that under most of these license agreements, the county is responsible for the maintenance of everything, the warning devices, the traffic signalization equipment. According to our estimates, because the numbers are very fuzzy, according to our estimates, it will cost the county approximately $280,000 more a year for the annual maintenance. So it's a big decision. Some of the other things that we've been focusing on while waiting for the draft EIS is Brevard County has released a memo where they are challenging the license agreements and the costs that are associated with it. We are watching that closely. We're also doing our own research on that issue. We're also following a group called CAREFUL, which stands for Citizens Against Rail Expansion in Florida. They've hired an outside attorney from Washington, D.C. Again, just evaluating what other groups are doing so that we know how to properly respond when the time comes. Last but not least, State Senator Thad Altman has requested from Pam Bondi an Attorney General opinion about the lease agreement between All Aboard Florida and the Orlando-Orange County Expressway Authority, and as to whether or not there's anything illegal going on, because basically what the lease agreement says is that you cannot put in an additional stop unless these preconditions are met.
I see.
And Senator Altman feels that there might be something to that. So those are the legal issues as they stand.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir?
Before you leave,
Yes, sir.
The number that you gave at the beginning for crossings, that was county, not city, right?
Yes.
Okay. There's 32 in the county, 7 in the city? 8 in the city?
Okay.
And
I meant the trains were going to cross 32 times when I said that number, just so we're clear.
30, there's 32
Because it's 16
opportunities
round-trip trains.
crossing in the city every day.
Yes.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you. The commitment the county made is to $100,000 to an attorney and another $30,000 or something to a consultant. There's a couple of different, and I mean you can stand and present to the city and to the viewers that's neutral, but I can tell you, anytime somebody wants to spend $100,000 on an attorney to fight me, that's anything but neutral. I think that it speaks volumes, just the fact that the county did that, and to my way of thinking, it's not good stuff. I'm not for or against All Aboard Florida. I'm all ears, but I am absolutely against taking taxpayer money and fighting some corporation that is coming into town to probably do what they have the legal right to do. And for us to spend a lot of money on attorneys is just wrong. The $280,000 a year additional once these trains go through for maintenance cost, where did that number come from?
That number I can state, Commission Member Hetty, is essentially the Public Works Director took into consideration the annual maintenance fees that the county pays at each of its crossings. Plus, every several years, there are rehabilitation costs that have to be paid for by the county. And then based upon the types of improvements that will be provided at each of the different crossings, based upon the maintenance and the rehabilitation costs, it was the Public Works Department's estimate that it would be $280,000 per year for the annual maintenance and
Additional,
that is correct.
What's the current? It's $280,000 on top of what? On top of $1 million?
I don't know the current number off the top of my head, sir. But we can provide that to you.
Okay. And the estimates for these costs, the party that's responsible for the maintenance, we're responsible for the cost, but All Aboard Florida is the one that's going to do the maintenance. And no?
What happens is at intersection crossings is essentially the work gets done by the railroad industry, and
right.
they have us pay for it. That's essentially how it works under the contracts.
Right. And the county or the city, we don't have we don't have any great choice in who's going to do it, nor would I want to see the city be able to choose the contractor that does this work. I want All Aboard Florida to do the maintenance on their equipment and to make sure it's safe. I want them to be the ones liable. I don't want to see a governing body do the maintenance.
If I may provide one small correction,
please.
I'm not sure if it's going to be All Aboard Florida or the FEC Railroad, but one of those two would be. I just want to clear that up.
Okay. Yeah. They're fine. As long as the railroad is doing it, I wouldn't want to see a governing agency in there tinkering with their equipment. But if it were government doing the work, there would be requests for proposals, there would be competitive bids, there would be lots of things, and All Aboard Florida or FEC are under no such restraints, and whatever bill they send us, whatever the cost is, and you're telling the taxpayers ahead of time, by the way, be ready to dig into your pocket for another $300,000. So when these kinds of numbers come up, the idea that, hold on a minute, this isn't going to cost the taxpayers anything is just wrong. It's costing us $130,000 because the county commission, wrongfully I think, appropriated money to fight All Aboard Florida. And they can argue all day long that, oh no, this is the study, this is whatever. Anytime you hire a lawyer, you're picking a fight. And that's just a simple reality, and I think that 90% of the Americans would agree with that. The attorneys won't agree with that, but I think that clear-thinking Americans would. The quiet zone, is the county that you know of, is the county contemplating any quiet zones at all?
I can say at this time the Board of County Commissioners authorized the staff to analyze quiet zone applications.
And do you know where that study is?
I do not know the status of that study, sir.
Okay, so you know of no current plan at this point for the county to implement any quiet zones at all?
I can tell you that the Board of County Commissioners has tasked the Community Development Department to analyze the application opportunities and bring that information back to the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay, and that's in-house staff. That's not.
That is correct, sir.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you. I have one quick question for the Assistant Attorney, please. The DEIS process, could you please explain to the general public a little bit about how that process works? It's a comment time for the public, and it's not like a hearing. So just please explain to the people how it actually works. And I'm just looking for a couple of lines how it works.
Okay. Do you fine with me? Yeah. All right. So the comment period. There is a specific. We think there's a specific way that the comment period is going to come forward. So if you have a concern, I'm trying to think how to address this. You have a concern. We are encouraging that a person not only copy us on that comment, but also submit it directly to the FRA.
Okay.
We will incorporate those comments we'll read them all, and we will incorporate as many as we can into our response ourselves that we are going to prepare. But essentially, the flow of everything is that you yourself as an individual are responsible for making the comments. Send it to the FRA, but send us a copy, and we will try to do what we can to incorporate it. Am I answering your question correctly?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
And what we can do as a city, and Ms. Vach will help us with this, is we'll put the address where the comments can go so people can send them. Does it have to be by letter, or can it be done by email?
First off, I just want to make sure I heard.
To FRA.
Oh, to FRA. We'll be. I don't know exactly where they're going to ask for those comments to go to. I assume when the public period opens that they will be providing us the route that they would like us to submit stuff. I can state for you that Commissioner Solari, who is here, drafted a letter to FRA specifically requesting FRA to state what is the best way, what do you prefer as the method for providing comments. We want to abide by what is the most efficient method for you as the agency. To the best of my knowledge, we have not heard a response yet.
Do you know how long ago the commissioner drafted the letter?
Maybe a month ago.
Okay, Ms. Vach, could you request a copy of that letter, please? Thank you, sir.
We'd be happy to provide a copy.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, too, in your questions about this EIS study,
yes.
I believe there's a couple of gentlemen in the room that have been through this process before, and the county attorneys have not. So if you would like to ask those gentlemen, I think they probably give you a clearer answer and maybe a one from more of an experience.
If I may, actually, I wasn't going to address this issue, but I think the commissioner's comment right there actually is a perfect example of why the Board of County Commissioners actually decided to hire counsel. Kate and I have extensive history and deal with local government issues. And I want you to understand that when the board says we want to pay $100,000 for outside counsel, what they're paying for is essentially attorneys who have the expertise in these types of issues that can help the county commission weave and work their way through the environmental impact statement process. And thus, if there are issues that need to be addressed or interests that need to be protected, those are going to be the folks that are going to have the greatest expertise in helping our board respond and provide comments. And thus, essentially, as you stated, there are people in the room that are not Kate and myself who have extensive experience in working with this, and we're just merely want to make sure that the comments of this community and of our commission are adequately presented to the FRA.
And I think that goes with a question that I had sent to you all, in which I know that you addressed a number of those concerns today. I have here on number 4, a Pacific being our rights concerning possible effects from all aboard Florida. And I think our county attorney explained pretty well in detail why the county Board of County Commissioners, in their wisdom, decided to hire a firm that specializes in that so they can advise the commissioners, that can in turn advise their constituents, what are our rights? Where do we go? How do we fill out these comment cards? What do we do? And so forth. I had another question. We had thought we were given the 75 days. It is the 45 days. What recommendations do you have as far as for the citizenry here in Indian River County? Who should they write to ask, hey, we need some more time, 45 days, we just don't think is enough. I know there's a lot of neighborhood groups out here that they're patiently waiting for the study to come out. They don't know if they have enough time. They thought they were going to be given a little extra time. And it's my understanding now it's only the 45 days, not the 75 days like we thought. Is that correct?
Well, what Ms. Kautner said was, we actually don't know. FRA has told us we don't know how long we're going to give you. What I can state is that if you would like a copy of the letter that we received from FRA or the one that we sent to FRA, we'd be happy to provide this commission with one so that you will have that for your records.
Thank you. All right, that's it on my questions. Anyone else, please? No. All right, next on the agenda.
We want to thank you all very much for
letting us come. Yes, sir. Thank you for coming by. We have the All Aboard Florida president here, and if he could please step forward, sir. His name is Mr. Michael Wrangler, and please go right ahead with your presentation. Take all the time that you like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Reininger, and as he said, I'm the president and chief development officer for All Aboard Florida. I appreciate the time to come before you and
thank you, sir.
And give you a little bit of a presentation and hopefully enlighten you on some things that you may not previously have known. That would be certainly my intention here today. We're building an important addition to the statewide infrastructure system. We are building a system that spins out significant benefits and unprecedented opportunity. Unprecedented is an important word here because the scale of the project that we're talking about, the sponsorship of the project, and the timing of the project are all also unprecedented. There's no doubt that this is the first of its kind solution to an infrastructure challenge that we in Florida simply must address. It's a challenge that's not unique to the state of Florida, but what is unique is the opportunity to lead with a smarter, faster, and better approach to solving this challenge in a way that does not place undue risk or burden on taxpayers of either the state of Florida or of the United States. We believe in what we're doing, and we're resolute in our optimism about the future. We work every day setting aside short-sighted criticisms that have no basis in reality. And what we found is that prejudging results without facts is simply counterproductive. What we know supports our optimism about the future. And we know that All Aboard Florida will offer an alternative mode of transportation in Florida that will provide a convenient, reliable, comfortable, and productive option for mobility. Not for every trip and not for every customer, but for a meaningfully sized audience that will change the way we think about moving about in the state of Florida. All Aboard Florida will provide a competitively priced option to something over 95% of the people that are traveling throughout the state, connecting between the cities that we will serve, who presently rely almost entirely on private automobiles. And we will have an option that is specifically tailored to what we know is the majority of those travelers in private automobiles who are either traveling alone in their cars or with one other passenger. All Aboard Florida will provide an environmentally responsible option that will take some 3 million cars off of our surrounding roads and along with them their negative impacts, including the ongoing need for taxpayer funding to build those roads and maintain those roads that those 3 million cars must depend on. All Aboard Florida will establish a modernized, more efficient, and ultimately the safest rail corridor in the United States as a result of the direct investment that our company will be making into the facilities of the system that exists today, investment dollars that are brought entirely by All Aboard Florida. Our program will create the cheapest, fastest, and easiest solution to achieving quiet zones in communities along the corridor that desire them, by leveraging the investment and the cooperation of All Aboard Florida to realize this benefit that touches everyone within a broad proximity of our rail corridor and has been talked about long before All Aboard Florida was even a notional possibility. Quiet zones means all trains, our trains and freight trains alike, can pass through communities without the need to blare their horns to warn the public of their approach, as federal law presently requires them to do. All Aboard Florida will provide solutions to other issues of concern that have been expressed related to the existing and future uses of the private property that is the corridor today, including issues around freight traffic, that absent the investment from All Aboard Florida will have no other means other than public participation to be addressed into the future. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to candidly address the concerns we most frequently hear and specifically clarify our position, offer insight into the realities of our program, and hopefully dispel some of the misrepresentations or confusion that we have run across as we've pursued our project. So with that, let me start with the issue of traffic congestion and any suggestion that our 32 passenger trains a day will somehow cause meaningful congestion or delays at intersections along the corridor. What's important that you understand is the following. When one of our trains crosses any one of the 360 interchanges that exist along our corridor, the total elapsed time of that intervention is on the order of magnitude of 45 seconds. Let me make sure you understand what I just said. The time it takes from as the train approaches, the warning signals to go off, a gate arm to lower into the intersection and stop the traffic in the intersection. The train moves through the intersection, the gate arm raises back up, and the traffic flow across that intersection is restored. The entirety of that intervention takes place in less than 45 seconds. It probably took me longer to explain it than it would actually take for the event to happen. That is true at each and every interchange on each and every grade crossing of our entire corridor. So let me go a little bit further with that. Because we're talking about 45 seconds, plus or minus a couple seconds, twice an hour, somewhere between the hours of 7:30 in the morning and about 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night in this particular portion of the corridor, which is when our trains will be moving through this area, what that means, simply, mathematically, is there's about a 97% probability that when you get in your car and move about the road systems in this area, that you will never even encounter one of our trains. And if you happen to be one of the 3% probability that actually does encounter the train, the sum total of that duration is less than 45 seconds. So when you get in your car today and you move about the city, ask yourself if you have a longer than 2 or 3 minute intervention associated with any individual stoplight that you might have come across, and whether or not you have a greater probability than 4% that you might hit one of those stoplights that exist on your road grid today. And the answer is obvious. The probabilities of you hitting a stoplight are far greater than 4%, and the average time of stoplights in the state of Florida is far longer than 45 seconds. And so the presumption that somehow this 45-second intervention with a 3% probability of happening is going to be the cause of resulting traffic jams is not founded in fact. Importantly, when we studied the characteristics of this operation in our first phase of the project, which has completed all of its examination, these are the areas where the density of development along the rail corridor is among the highest in the state of Florida, and the traffic counts on the road system around these intersections are also among the highest in Florida. Not surprisingly, what was found is that the effect of these trains moving through these intersections has no significant effect on the surrounding traffic grid of the area. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more about the reality of the issue associated with traffic congestion and the interventions of our trains onto the corridor. The next major issue that I'd like to take on is the broader issue of safety. For us, safety is not only the primary obligation that we take on with our business of transporting public passengers, it's also the single biggest issue that's central to ultimately the success of our business proposition. If we do not have an entirely reliable, entirely safe operation, we simply don't have a business. So for us, for very practical reasons, safety resides at the very top of the priority lists that we have to address day by day. As a result of that, we are going to be building the safest rail corridor in America by adhering to the highest applicable standards across the board for the operation of the train system that we will be putting into ground. By definition, no other train system in the United States will have all of the characteristics of safety associated with it that ours will, simply because none other than, including many systems that operate at speeds higher than what we will be proposing, have all of the safety accommodations that we will be making into our corridor, all of which will be entirely funded by our private sector investment into this corridor. I hope that's entirely clear as relates to the issue of safety. Another one of the major issues that we hear a lot about has to do with our integration with the marine industry, and specifically around the topic of there happen to be 3 movable bridges on our rail corridor and the intervention of our train system as it relates to those movable bridges. Our goal is very clear as it relates to the marine industry, and that is to continue to coexist peacefully with the use of that resource in the same way that we have now for over 100 years. We have an ongoing dialogue and a very cooperative spirit directly with the marine industry so that they understand exactly what we are doing, and we understand clearly what their pain points are and what their areas of concern are with respect to the shared use of those resources. We are directing quite literally millions and millions of dollars specifically around the issue of these movable bridges, really to affect a number of things. Number one, to add increased capacity on these bridges that will result in a reduced need to actually operate the bridge. To the extent that you have more capacity on the bridge, you can pass more trains on that bridge in an individual closure, which means you have to operate the bridge less frequently. We are investing in increased reliability of those operating bridges through upgrades and, in some cases, total replacements of mechanisms specifically designed to change the dynamic of the reliability of those bridges so that we result in what we're all looking for, which is bridges that operate as quickly, as smoothly, and as reliably as they possibly can. We're investing massive amounts of money in new technology and signal systems that will result in faster operating speeds for the bridges themselves, which is to say the movement of the bridge from the time it starts to the time it finishes its cycle will be faster than it is today as a direct result of the upgrades, improvements, and investments that we are making. We are synchronizing the schedules between our operations and the freight railroad operations, again, so that we can optimize the utility of that infrastructure, resulting in an operation that is as least impactful as it possibly can be with respect to the operation of those bridges. And lastly, we're investing in awareness and information that will be distributed to the marine community, including ideas like the ability to have an application on cell phones and or computer devices which will broadcast the information with respect to the status of those bridges. So in advance of approaching a bridge, you will know whether it's open and closed. And if it's open, it'll tell you when the next closure happens. And if it's closed, it'll tell you how long before the next opening were to happen. We've learned through our ongoing dialogue with the marine industry that prior information is particularly useful in organizing a joint use of that resource, and is something that they've been very, very interested in seeing happen, and it's something that our investment will physically produce. Another topic happens to do with additional stops. Let me grab some water here, if you don't mind. Additional stops on the system, and there was some mention made about that topic a little while ago. There have been many requests for additional stops along our system, including places very nearby this room. What we say about that is there is no future with respect to additional stops under our system until we conclude with the present, which is to say we will make the rational business decisions about the expansion of our system as any business would once our original premise, which we have to remain laser focused on, has been completed, and we have the giant leap forward, which is to reinstigate passenger service onto this corridor. Without that reinstitution of passenger service onto this corridor, the notion of additional stops and expansions of the business really has no basis in reality. And because of the novel nature of what we're doing, we are fully committed to what we believe is the core system that we are building in our first two phases of execution of this project. And I'll speak a little bit more about that momentarily. There's been a lot of talk about state subsidies and the notion that somehow there is a redirection of state funds that are specifically directed to All Aboard Florida as an earmarked support for the project. I think the governor has made it abundantly clear on numerous occasions that our investment is an 100% private sector investment, and that he intends not to direct any state funds in the form of grants or subsidies to our project. The Secretary of Transportation has reinforced this message as recent as the last few days as he was on a fact-finding tour through this particular part of Florida. And he's also indicated that there are no state dollars that are being directed towards the All Aboard Florida project. The executive director of the Greater Orlando Aviation Authority has recently made it abundantly clear that the funds that have been directed to an intermodal facility at the Orlando International Airport are the result of about a 26-year effort related to the long-term expansion of the airport, and was the result of a massive effort that crossed party lines, that was local, that was state, that was federal, that was all part and parcel of a long-term vision around that important infrastructure base. And that in no way were the funds that have been directed against that intermodal facility directly beneficial to us only. In fact, as a payer of rent in the facilities that are going to be constructed at the international airport, that money came in two parts. One part of it was a grant to the airport authority, and the other part was a loan. The rent that we are paying for that facility, the same way that every other tenant in those facilities will ultimately pay rent, in fact, is the revenue that offsets the obligations of the loan portion of that funding that was provided. So in that way, it's really the opposite of a financial subsidy. We are supporting the investment that has already been made into the facilities at the Greater Orlando Aviation Authority. There's also been an enormous amount of talk about federal grants, and in particular the RIF process. And let me explain, if I can briefly, what these words really mean. The RIF program is a long-standing, existing program that was set into motion in 1998. It is an incentive program that was designed, as its name implies, Railroad Rehabilitation Investment Fund, specifically to do exactly what we're doing. That is, to incent private investment into the nation's railroad infrastructure. It is a loan. It is not a grant. It is debt that we ultimately have to pay back with interest. The program, beyond being targeted specifically to railroad rehabilitation and improvements in the United States, also looks more favorably upon projects that, in addition to railroad rehabilitation, provide environmental benefits, provide safety upgrades into the nation's railroad system, and provide economic development opportunities in the locations that these projects are to be built, all of which align incredibly squarely with the nature of what All Aboard Florida represents as a project. The way the system works is that it uses the lower interest rate that is available to the federal government to produce the need for lower interest payments, leaving a company like ours more money to invest in hard assets and tangible improvements that result in the very improvements that the project, that the program is designed to incent. So instead of spending more money on interest, we have the ability to spend more money on hard assets including safety improvements, in order to make the project come to fruition. The project is underwritten by the Department of Transportation Credit Committee. It is further underwritten by a third-party group of independent experts and financial analysts who are hired by the Department of Transportation to fully underwrite and assess the creditworthiness of all applicant projects, including ourselves, on behalf of the federal government. The loan is also a secured loan. It is secured both by something that's known as a credit risk premium, which is an upfront cash payment that is determined by the credit committee and the applicant would pay. Those sums go into a pool, and that pool stands as a reserve against any defaults that might happen in the overall system. But more importantly, these loans are secured by hard asset collateral that the applicants must put forward. And very importantly, that collateral is assessed at the salvage value or the recapture value that those assets really represent, such that the exposure to the lender is mitigated by both of those levels of security. It is an incredibly comprehensive and incredibly transparent and long-standing system that is designed exactly to do what we are doing, and is why we believe that it is the primary vehicle that will help us make this major infrastructure improvement into the state of Florida. Next, I'd like to take on the issue of our business plan. We've heard many, what I can only categorize as demands, for us to produce our business plan, as though some right to this private and confidential information is held by the public. We won't divulge our confidential and proprietary information any more than any other private individual or company would. Let's make no mistake about that. But let's also not make a mistake about the fact that that does not mean that those who do need that information don't have it. They, in fact, do. Investors in our company are privy to that, as they are the ones who are really at risk for the investment dollars that we're putting in place. The credit committee of the Department of Transportation is privy to that information. The independent financial analysts of the Department of Transportation are privy to that information, as it's up to them to really assess the creditworthiness of our project through a process and a design that is long-standing and well known. When you apply for a qualifying mortgage from a bank, you share the necessary private financial data with that bank so that they can make a credit decision. That does not mean that that information is publicly available or that they should share that with your neighbors, as they have no right or no need for that private information. The process that we're talking about here is really identical to that process. What we will share is our very clear thesis against which we're investing over $1 billion of cash and assets. We know passenger rail works when two kinds of characteristics exist. First, wherever travel by car is challenged by constrained roads and excessive traffic, another option is quite simply a more desirable and reliable option. Our first phase, providing service to the largest population densities and served exclusively by the I-95 corridor, is a textbook example of this characteristic. The second situation that has proven effective for passenger rail is for trips that are too short to fly and too long to drive. Specifically, what we have found is for trips in the 250 to 350 mile range that can be completed in 3 hours, trains become the favorite mode for many travelers, simply because this trip is as fast as flying and faster than driving, and much more reliable and comfortable than either of those two options. We have identified a very large market potential, with well over 400 million trips currently being taken in the state that are specifically intercity trips among the locations that we will be serving. We further qualified that marketplace by proximity to our station, which is to say those trips that start and end directly near our station locations. and we've studied the nature of those trips and of the customer profiles that are taking those trips. We have projected a penetration rate into that market based on our price expectations, which are to be competitive with the cost of driving your car. And remember what I said earlier, the majority of those people that are in their car are either alone or with one other passenger. And we're also basing our penetration rate on the learnings from other analogs. We are expecting to capture only a few percentage points of the existing trips, and that penetration rate supports our projections for profitability. We are developing marketing relationships and affiliations to further support our initial ridership projections. We have created a bottoms-up operating cost pro forma using the experienced people on our team that are among the industry's most knowledgeable and respected professionals, and we are simultaneously developing several million square feet of commercial real estate at our station hubs. And while this is an independent profit center for our company, it indeed further supports our overall business proposition. So our view is really pretty straightforward and ultimately rational. As Florida grows from 19.5 million to 25 million plus people and hosts over 100 million visitors a year within the next 15 years, there is both room for and demand for a transportation option to carry the load of some of that need. Blessed with an irreplaceable piece of infrastructure, located ideally for access by the greatest drivers of that demand, and benefited by a century of previous investment into that asset base, the economics of the solution make it possible for us to provide the system without public subsidies for operations and initial development. That is a simple fact that is unheard of anywhere else in the United States. The resulting system not only carries its own weight, it also reduces other burdens that must be carried by the public sector, like the costs of roads and the effect of environmental degradation, and ultimately the loss of productivity and lifestyle impacts that more cars on ever-increasingly congested roadways certainly portend. And beyond providing self-funded solutions and relieving existing pressures, the project generates huge benefits in the form of tens of thousands of new jobs, billions of dollars of new economic activity, and tens of millions of dollars in new annual tax revenues that will be distributed across the state at large, including benefiting jurisdictions as local as this. We know passenger rail can be profitable. It is, right here in the United States. On the only other really relevant intercity service in the United States, Amtrak's Acela service, when isolated from the entire system, is highly profitable. And this profit, in turn, subsidizes the losses generated on the other portions of the system where passenger counts and revenues do not support the operating cost. The Acela system alone generates over $521 million a year in revenue and $214 million of earnings as isolated from the rest of the system. That accounts for more than 25% of the total of Amtrak revenues generated across the United States. But that's not the only example. There's a recently introduced new line by Amtrak that serves the cities of Lynchburg, Virginia into Washington, D.C., and that operation became instantly profitable in its first year of operation and continues to be so today. They also introduced another new service connecting Norfolk to Richmond, Virginia, also a system that operates in the black. And there's yet another seasonal system that connects the cities of Boston and Cape Cod that also operates, carrying its own financial weight. An express intercity passenger service works incredibly well in other places around the world as well. We've studied all of these systems deeply, and we've modeled our own system based on the core factors that drive these successes, and we have innovated this model for specific application to our market and for our targeted customers. If anyone tells you no profitable passenger rail exists, they are simply making a statement that is not supported by facts. It is not true. We believe plenty of people will want to ride our trains, and that our option is totally aligned with the preferences of millions in Florida that vote with their feet every day when they choose to use the existing rail systems that are increasing in popularity with each passing month. And by that I mean the Tri-Rail system that serves over 4.5 million annual riders commuting in South Florida, or the Metro Rail system that serves over 21 million annual riders in Metro Miami-Dade, or the Metro Mover system that serves over 9 million annual passengers zipping throughout downtown Miami, or the Sunrail system that's already hitting its targeted stabilized ridership of over 4,000 passengers per day, serving Central Florida commuters. Mass transit by rail is a part of our future, and we should all seize on the opportunity to redefine what it means to travel by train in the United States, starting right here, starting right now. We know that several times in recent history, here in this area of Florida, perhaps by some in this room today, there has been strong advocates for other passenger rail opportunities, even as these ideas required direct public funding support. Beyond delivering some of these desired services directly, integrating passenger service back onto this historic corridor sets up further integration of still more service into this area of Florida, including the future integration of Tri-Rail. Without All Aboard Florida and its investment, these possibilities simply do not exist. We offer these points of clarification to amplify what we've been actively trying to communicate in many hundreds and hundreds of individual meetings, discussions, briefings, and presentations. I also offer all of this in advance of the receipt of the upcoming DEIS document, which we spoke of earlier, which we expect to be wholly comprehensive and detailed, and the product of a tested and transparent process that is regularly applied to projects such as our own. All Aboard Florida is a very ambitious project without recent precedent. It's full of firsts and represents a giant leap forward to an enlightened future. We're very proud of that fact and make no apologies for our resolve to see this important challenge through from an unendingly optimistic point of view. We think Florida deserves that, and we know we can accomplish these objectives. What we ask of all of you is honest collaboration and supportive cooperation. And with that, I'd be happy to entertain your questions.
Okay, Mr. Hardy, would you like to kick it off?
Yeah, I have some questions. You talked about present law and quiet zones. Help me understand and make sure that my understanding is correct. The quiet zones releases the engineer from the requirement that he use the horn. Doesn't prevent him from using the horn, doesn't stop the horns, it just releases.
If your question is, does the train still have a horn? The answer is it does still have a horn.
And the engineer is free to use it when he sees fit.
In the case of an emergency, yes, or a failure of some other system, absolutely.
Right. The quiet zone releases the requirement of the engineer to use the horn.
It's a federal law, yes.
Okay. The 45 seconds you talked about, at what speed?
That's at 69 miles an hour.
That's at 69.
So it stands to reason if the train is moving faster, the duration will be shorter.
Yeah, that's fine. The you talked about the system that you're building, and you envision the safest train corridor in the United States. And I would venture to guess that the average American will tell you that the interstate system is safe. I think that the statistics probably show that the interstate system is safe, the roads. But I think that the statistics also show that in South Florida, 95 is the most dangerous highway to be on. And you're going through that same area of South Florida. And I'm not sure why 95 in South Florida is such a dangerous road. And since I'm pushing 70, I don't want to pick on all the old people because I am one. But it's probably got something to do with us old people driving. And there are a lot of grade level crossings that you're going to have to be going through with some old drivers, but and I hope you're right that it's the safest corridor. The marine that you talked about, there's no issue really in Indian River County or Vero Beach on that. No more stops. If you don't put it in, there'll never be any stops. I would agree with that. But I would also tell you that there's a fair amount of people on both sides of that. They don't want a stop in Vero Beach. They don't want a major airport in Vero Beach. They don't want a lot of things. They like the quiet little town, and they want a little quiet little town. You talked about the state subsidies and the federal subsidies, and generally speaking, I'm not opposed to taxpayer dollars supporting public transportation. And anybody that thinks that it's not a good investment should travel with me sometime to Haiti or, one of the nations where they don't spend money on infrastructure. They don't spend. The roads are subsidized. The airports are subsidized. The ports are subsidized. And I don't have a big problem if the railroad, including yours, was somewhat subsidized. And I think that if you listen to everything that's said, it is going to be somewhat subsidized. I just, I don't have a problem with the subsidies, but I would like to know what the subsidies are. It's kind of like the $280,000 that the...
But Mr. Hetty, I have to ask, what subsidies are you referring to?
Well, the county attorney talked about $280,000 a year additional just in our cost, taxpayers' cost, for the crossings. You can call it whatever you want, but the taxpayer that has to pay it probably calls it a subsidy. And because it's our cost. And again, generally speaking, I don't have a problem with subsidies for public transportation. I think that's a good thing. But to stand and say that this is all private money and there's no subsidies, but I think that in large measure, the people that have come out against All Aboard Florida, some of the reasons. I don't want, as a commission member, I don't want to say that they're almost laughable, some of them, because they are concerns and are legitimate concerns for the people that expressed them.
We understand that because this is new and because there aren't other precedents that people can look for direct comparison, that it will raise questions and that will make people anxious about certain issues. We completely understand that. We have been working for 3 years with a very large team of dedicated people to first understand what those concerns are and then specifically address those legitimate concerns with a response so that the end process of this process is something that mitigates or alleviates any of those concerns that turned out to be real, or that the information that would change the point of view about a misperception is available.
And then last but not least, I just wanted to say thank you for coming to the meeting and being willing to answer questions of the commission. And I would also ask the chairman, if it's possible, there's a room full of the public here. Is it possible for you to answer their questions?
I will do my best.
Good man. Thank you. Appreciate that answer.
Ma'am?
I completely understand the presentation that you've made today, and I appreciate you coming in. I don't have any questions for you at this time.
Thank you. I have a couple of quick questions. The last train that you say will be through our city, you say will be around 10. Do you anticipate any later trains through our city in the event this project goes through?
So we don't have the final operating schedules configured yet. But our expectation is that, as we've said repeatedly, that we're going to run 16 round trips. We're going to start early operations out of both ends of the system, Orlando and Miami, probably as early as 6 o'clock in the morning. Therefore, by the time it gets here, it's going to be plus or minus in the 7:30 range. We're going to have last trains pulling into the stations on the end somewhere around 11:30. So by definition, they're going to be in the 10:30 range as they hit this particular geography. Obviously, the time will be slightly different. As the
Understood.
Where you are in the geography. I don't expect that there are going to be huge variations around that particular operating schedule. Again, as a result of study, what we've figured out is that it's very important that the nature of the service that we operate is convenient, which is to say when you want to go, it's ready to go. And there are 3 kinds of customers here that we're dealing with: residents, tourists, and business people. Business people are typically the ones that want to get up in the morning early so that they can get to their destination and start their business day in the early hours. They're also the ones that want to take sort of the last ones out at the end of the business day to get home at the the end of the day. The other two market segments generally like to travel in that middle, and so we've developed an operating schedule based on those characteristics of customer preferences that we've learned.
Okay, thank you. Next question. You talked about, as far as with our crossings and all, and the when your high-speed train passenger goes through the crossings, you really won't notice it too much, and there will not be any traffic jams according to the work that you folks have done with your studies. In the event that there are some situations, I don't want to use the word traffic jams, but let's say that the traffic is held up, and the city of Vero Beach finds it necessary to contact you people to say, look, it's really not working at these particular crossings or at this crossings. What avenues would the city take to make their case to say, look, it's not working, you're going to have to do something else?
If it's something, first of all, I don't know how that can happen, but
okay.
Let's say it happens. Call us. I mean,
okay.
we're serving the community, right? So we're not hard to find.
Okay. So there would be some solutions that the city and all aboard Florida could work out if the city makes its point.
You're asking me to make a hypothetical judgment on a hypothetical situation, hypothetically, sure.
Okay, so you would be helpful. Okay. No, mainly because what you were saying about the marine industry, to coexist peacefully. And I would take that you also mean with the cities throughout the corridor that your company wants to maintain peace along that corridor with all the cities.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's all of us. So that's important for us. My next question, could you please tell the general public what speed your passenger service train will be coming through the city of Vero Beach in our county?
Sure, it varies. I can't tell you specifically on a point-by-point basis, but in this area, generally, we will reach speeds of 110 miles an hour at its maximum. There are going to be places, as was mentioned by someone earlier today, where the track configurations or the physical configurations of the infrastructure require the trains to be moving at a slower speed. But the train will move as fast as 110 miles an hour in this specific geography.
Okay, and the reason I asked that question, as this rolls on out, and let's say for the sake of argument, your project goes forward, and the speeds are 110 through our city, and there will be some, maybe in the future, some repercussions with that, and the city approaches your company and says, we really do need you to slow down through our city and some different parts of our county. Would your company be willing to look at that and reduce your speeds? If not, tell us why.
Again, under what scenario are we really discussing this? You're presenting a hypothetical situation
yes.
against which I have no response.
Okay.
We're studying the impacts of the speed of the train as we project it.
Yes.
We're studying the environmental outcomes of the result of that operation.
Yes.
And we're going to address all of those specific results when they are known as from the DEIS. We have an operating profile of our service, which is designed to meet the needs of the customers that we've defined as is appropriate. If there are issues that arise out of that operating characteristic, we will address them directly. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's for the general public because they are very concerned with the speed of the passenger train coming through. After construction,
what's really important
yes.
is that the safety characteristics of the corridor match the operating characteristics of the trains that run in the corridor.
All right, thank you.
And we are applying the highest applicable standards against that safety protocol throughout the entirety of our corridor. We are making those investments to ensure that we can operate the trains safely and reliably at the operating characteristics that we need to operate our business without negative impact from a safety perspective or from an environmental perspective on any of the surrounding area of our corridor. I can't be any more clear than that.
Because the way it was explained to us is your model, you are set up on about a 3-hour time frame from point A to point B. Is that
That's
correct?
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
And that's when you're working your model, you're working the speeds into that model.
Absolutely.
Okay. After the construction is finished, and I'm just talking about the city of Vero Beach, and I know you're aware we have one track through here. When you're finished, it's our understanding you're going to be laying in an additional track. Do you plan on putting any more tracks in the future?
We are making the investment to provide specifically the additional capacity necessary to operate our 32 trains on the existing infrastructure. That requires us to make the track capacity changes that we are proposing right now. We have no intention of running more trains than that. Therefore, we have no need for any foreseeable additional infrastructure associated with our operation.
So we have, through the city, portions of our city, we have the one track. Do you have to lay in another track? So there'll be 2 tracks.
There will be 2 tracks throughout virtually the entirety of our system.
And that's all you, at this time, what you're planning?
That's what our current demand has shown.
Okay.
And all of those configurations are part and parcel of the environmental impact statement that is being studied today, and it's also been part and parcel of all the diagnostics of all the crossings that we've recently concluded in this area.
Inside the existing corridor, let's talk about the city of Vero Beach. In the future, if you had to lay in another set of tracks, which would be 3 sets, is there room inside that corridor for 3 sets?
Physically, there is. There are systems in places in the world in a 100-foot corridor that have as many as 7 tracks in a 100-foot corridor. So the direct answer to your question is, could you put more than 2 tracks in a 100-foot corridor? Absolutely, you could.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from the commission?
No.
Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Daig, one
Go ahead,
question.
Mr. Heddy.
You said, sir, there will be virtually 2 tracks for the entirety of the system. South of here, there's 2 tracks anyway. More than that.
Yeah, for the most part.
But you envision 2 tracks every place else?
There are, as a matter of fact, there are a couple of short stretches in the entirety of our 235-mile right-of-way which will exist with single-track configurations, simply because they can, according to the operating characteristics of our program and the existing freight operations. Again, we're not motivated to make investments in infrastructure that's not necessary, and where we can get by with 1 track, we are. And I believe that we have 2 places across the 235 miles that will operate that can operate with a single track, and that has to do with the timing of the operations of the 2 railroads and the passing.
Where are those 2 locations?
There's one slightly north of here, and there's one on the east-west portion of our leg from Cocoa into Orlando.
Thank you.
All right, that takes care of us. Thank you again for coming by and spending your time with us. We really do appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, I asked the gentleman, and I ask you, there's a lot of people here from the public. Can you give them the opportunity to get some answers to the questions from
We're
this
moving
gentleman?
into that portion with the general public. If they would like to come up and make comments, and sir, it's completely up to you if you'd like to answer any questions that come your way.
I'll do my best.
Thank you, sir. Okay, please step up, whoever would like to step up. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Afternoon. It's good to see you. I'm Phyllis Fry at 275 Date Palm Road. May I remove this paper so that I can use the... Thank you, Tammy. I'd like to discuss the impacts that All Aboard Florida will have on our community as featured in All Aboard Florida's 6-point television advertisement. I don't know if any of you have seen that or not, but it runs repetitively throughout the day and night. All Aboard Florida begins by stating, quote, "So cars can be taken off congested highways," end quote. All Aboard Florida claims they'll be removing 3 million cars from our highways. So to understand the net impact of this, I ask you to refer to the following calculation on the screen.
It's backwards.
Should have done a trial run, I'm sorry, but I'll read it to you. We're using the formula C for cars removed, 3 million. D for days of the year, 365. Hours, H, per day of peak highway use, estimated 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., 14. Miles from Miami to Orlando, 230. R, major highways from Miami to Orlando, 2, I-95 and Florida Turnpike. The calculation demonstrates that if 3 million cars were removed by All Aboard Florida, how many fewer cars would you see 1 mile ahead of you on the highway Let's do the calculation. 3 million cars, 365 days, 230 miles, 14 hours, 2 routes equals 1.27 cars. Conclusion. While driving on I-95 or the Turnpike, you'll look 1 mile down the road and be able to remove 1 car. That is the net impact All Aboard Florida will have on the congestion on our highways. If the 3 million cars are taken off the roads per year, as they claim, that's an average of 2 passengers per car that are allegedly going to abandon their automobiles and jump into All Aboard Florida trains. Let's do the math. 2 passengers per car, 6 million people, divided by 32 trains per day, 513 per train, or the equivalent of 2 jumbo jets per train, or 64 jumbo jets per day, or 18,000 passengers. Not likely. By the way, these are 3 million cars that drive into our communities. They bring tourist dollars and trade and revenues to our businesses, and All Aboard Florida would take that away. All Aboard Florida will have an impact on our roads, but their claim that this will reduce congestion is false. The net effect will actually increase road congestion. Let's use Vero Beach as an example, and you can multiply this effect by a total of 353 crossings from Brevard to Miami-Dade. Let's try this machine again.
The other way. Flip it over. No. Flip it. There you go.
First time. Okay, well, I'm trying to show you the downtown 3 intersections that don't quite fit here, but I'll give you the statistics. 1, 2, 3. We know where they are, but there they are. And what I'm showing here is that in Vero Beach, thanks, we have 24,800 vehicles per day that use our 3 downtown crossings. But because our city is struggling with budget constraints and many basic services are being cut, and as one council member stated, we may have to enter into bankruptcy. We may be losing our city. Therefore, we may have to close down 2 of the downtown crossings because we cannot afford the improvements that All Aboard Florida is foisting upon us. With 2 out of 3 of our crossings closed, logic dictates that there will be more backups and congestion on our roads, not less, to accommodate 24,800 vehicles per day, narrowed down to 1 crossing. Addressing further increased congestion, Harry Bruce, former owner of a Chicago railroad, describes the massive processes necessary for the digging out and the rebuilding of roadbeds at these crossings. Their complete excavation, including gates, signals, and crossings, with industrial trucks delivering new fill, plus the huge disruption of traffic on adjacent roads as this process takes place on long stretches. The disruption of local trade and commerce and the loss of revenue to our local businesses and the tourist industry, which will hurt our economy while increasing congestion and disruption. All Aboard Florida's next television statement says, quote, brings tens of thousands of jobs, end quote. That is a track-laying machine. As Brevard County Commissioner Andy Anderson told Rusty Roberts, we know that these construction jobs are highly mechanized, temporary, and transitory in nature, consisting of specialized crews that will be brought from outside our area that will not bring jobs to our local residents. In my 10 years of reading job prospectuses, he said, this is the worst. Take it back to whoever wrote it and tell them to stop smoking crack, end quote. Not my words, his. Then the next giant All Aboard Florida claim on television is financed without taxpayer grants or giveaways, end quote. It's very cleverly worded. They are the masters at this. As we all well know, All Aboard Florida will be financed with a RIF loan, which is $1.5 billion in taxpayer money that we are graciously lending out to All Aboard Florida at the rate of 5.75% for 35 years. with interest, the amount will be $2.5 billion, and that too is a pecuniary aid and is a taxpayer subsidy. Let's not forget their $405 million in junk bonds at 12.5%, which may well be paid off with the RIF loan. Bottom line, if All Aboard Florida had to go out and apply for this loan in the marketplace, they could never do it. So they're totally dependent on taxpayer money, and yet they continue to run these ads deceiving the public. But of course, it's always better to use other people's money. It is corporate welfare. Regarding additional cost to the taxpayer, the annual fee projections for the crossings on unincorporated land for just the three counties, Indian River, $550,000, Brevard, $768,000, and Martin, $1,400,000. That's about double what it is now, and that doesn't even include the city crossings. All Aboard Florida has offered a discount rate for the engineering and design work, but FEC stated that this will be pre-funded, meaning that we'll be billed for it later. Bottom line, All Aboard Florida and FEC will end up with nearly $1 billion in improved assets, all paid for at our expense. What other costs are we facing? As a result of the expansionism of the Panama Canal and the doubling and the tripling of freight, as per President and CEO of FEC Freight, James Hertwig, told the Press Journal, quote, "We'll service 70% of the country's population overnight and the rest within 4 days," end quote. So, in addition to All Aboard Florida's 32 passenger trains hurtling through our neighborhoods at 110 miles per hour every 24 minutes, FEC will be sending as many as 50 trains per day, 2.5 miles long, dispelling All Aboard Florida's advertising myth about short trains clearing the intersection in less than 1 minute. And this, too, will increase congestion. There'll be a giant industrial mobile complex of trains grinding through our small treasured communities, triple-tracked in some areas. The lives and the livelihoods of tens of thousands of people are going to be negatively impacted. Where will our piece of paradise go, and the atmosphere tourists come here to find? And how will this affect our bottom line? 2 independent studies from the Martin County Appraiser's Office shows that properties located within 1,000 feet of the tracks will decline in value between 5 to 20%. In St. Lucie County, for example, there are over 1,500 properties that fall within that parameter, valued at $300 million. That is an average loss of $37 million that will disappear from the ad valorem tax rolls. In Indian River County, we have 4,000 properties that fall within that parameter, or 2.5 times as many as St. Lucie County. Can we afford to lose over $90 million from our tax rolls? In Martin County, 1,400 properties, and in Palm Beach, over 170,000 properties fall into this category. This is not a NIMBY issue. This is a nomad issue, not on my dime. And it's certainly not about prosperity. As we know from individual reports and letters from real estate agents, the sell-off is already beginning. Long before the first track is laid, and even if you do not live close to the tracks, the ripple effect of lost ad valorem taxes is going to be felt. Our real estate values are declining, and our taxes will be soaring. It doesn't work. But they're not finished with us yet. The RIF loan doesn't just cover rails and train cars. It also covers real estate development. So Fortress, parent company, sends its subsidiary Flagler Real Estate flying into our communities under the radar with a sweetheart loan of 5.7%, able to underbid any other developer that raises its head. Flagler Holdings brings in their pre-chosen developers, builders, architects, and construction crews under no-bid contracts. Excuse me. After I've finished, please, if you don't mind. You had your time. No-bid contracts, which again will not bring local jobs. They will give us pennies on the dollar for our devalued real estate for their profit, not ours. This is not the free market at work. This is federally funded intrusion, public-private partnerships, and the public loses every time. Another false claim on the television ad states, All Aboard Florida will preserve our environment. I attended the recent Lagoon Collaborative held here in Indian River County. Scientists from as far away as Chesapeake Bay came to share their expertise on how to save our lagoon. They came up with some viable solutions, and they concluded their studies showing that the greatest threat is not algae blooms. It's not runoff or muck, although those are important. It is the high concentration of human population that poses the greatest threat. As one scientist said, wherever there are high concentrations of people, that is where you'll find the problems, end quote. The All Aboard Florida project will encourage compact, mixed-use development that enhances higher density and intensity as the preferred form of development. And I must ask, preferred by whom? This is their vision for Indian River County. This is All Aboard Florida rendering of the proposed Miami terminal. Two 80-story buildings surrounded by high-intensity population development. How can this be good for the lagoon? This is their vision for transit-oriented development. Wherever there is a stop, be careful what you ask for when you accept the promise of crumbs that All Aboard Florida offers you, such as a stop. They're not coming here out of the goodness of their hearts to provide you with passenger service. The robber barons of 1800s are back. They're coming here for two things only, our money and our land. All Aboard Florida is all about freight, and most of all, it's all about real estate. Their profits, not ours. High-density development. Not only are we going to be living with this nightmare, we're going to be dying from it. All Aboard Florida's television ad states, bringing you the safest trains in America. Fact, 79% of all railway accidents in America occur in Southeast Florida. Why? Because we have more at-grade crossings than anywhere else in the country. In the past 10 years, FEC has incurred 134 railway deaths. In the past 5 years, 21 deaths and 72 crossing accidents. There were 84 FEC random crossing deaths for that same period, which FDOT calls epidemic in our area. In the past 4 years, Tri-Rail, which operates at speeds of 35 to 45 miles per hour, incurred 11 deaths and 7 injuries. In 2014, 7 railway deaths have already occurred. All Aboard Florida intends to operate at 3 times Tri-Rail speed with an increased frequency of 32 times per day. This will increase the likelihood of deaths and injuries by over 300%. As for freight trains, 10,000 rail tons traveling at 50 miles an hour will take 1 to 1.5 miles to make an emergency stop. A passenger train, 800 feet long, traveling at 110 miles per hour, takes approximately 1/2 to 3/4 miles to stop. From the time a train moving at 110 miles an hour sounds its horn until impact is 7 seconds. A school bus stalled on the tracks, a mother with a baby in the back seat, or a senior citizen has 7 seconds to die. Rusty Roberts told the Indian River School Board that the gate comes down 30 seconds before the train reaches the crossing. No sealed car door is going to make this safe, but what it will do is leave All Aboard Florida and FEC a $1 billion improved asset, including a second track that will have been paid for out of our pockets while our safety has been held hostage. One last word. Before All Aboard Florida continues to tie itself to Henry Flagler's coattails on its television ads, they might want to be honest with the public and let them know that the train that once brought life to Florida is about to kill it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Woodinger had a couple of comments to some of the things she said.
That's completely up to the president of All Aboard Florida.
Yeah, well.
I was happy to answer any questions. I didn't hear a question in that.
Oh, well, you said something.
I lost track of the misstatements of fact, like very early on, so I really don't have anything to add to that.
Okay.
And thank you. And the purpose of these meetings, the All Aboard Florida team are our guests, and they're entitled to come in and tell us what's on their minds. I think it's given a good insight of where they stand on their project, things they're willing to do, things they're not willing to do. I think the gentleman was pretty straightforward. And also for the gentlemen from All Aboard Florida that are here today, you can hear from our residents a little bit what's on their mind. You know, we try to afford everybody plenty of time to speak where we don't throttle back, so you can get a feeling, again, for what's going on in the community. And with that being said, who else would like to come up to address the commission? Yes, sir, come right up. State your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Donald Hood from 440th Court Southwest. First, I wanted to make a comment to Mr. Hetty. Thank you about your comment about the wasted dollars by the commission, the Indian River County Commission, the tax dollars. I imagine there's several people who haven't had their roads paved yet that are wondering whether that $100,000 could have been used more efficiently than to hire a railroad knowledgeable attorney. Thank you for making those comments. I appreciate it. Second of all, I have a question for the lady who made the last presentation. I'd be interested to know what her reasoning is for, or why she's so dead set against this. Does she have some particular problem with All Aboard Florida that maybe is going to suffer some financial gain or something? I've never heard such a mismatch of facts in my life.
With that being said, as I stated a few moments ago, sir,
Understand? I take it back.
We're hearing from everybody, and I want them to have a way to express themselves.
Understand.
And that is, people are telling us what's on their mind, and just like you're going to tell us what's on your mind. I don't want to get back and forth with bringing someone up. The purpose of this commission is to hear from all and to be open to all.
Understand. I just
Thank
was
you.
a little upset by the negativity.
I understand.
I gave a 4-page presentation to the city clerk, and basically it's a revision of a document that I read about 2 months ago. I made some revisions to it. I don't want to take the council's time with that tonight. However, something has come up that I think is of interest, a couple things actually. And so I revised this document and I've turned it in for posting. First one is I received via email, and the clerk has a copy of this, an article out of Trains magazine from August 2014. Now, I'm not a subscriber to that. I'm not a railroad person. I do not own stock in the FEC or AAF or anything else. This particular article came to me from a friend in the United Kingdom. Even though this is a U.S.-based magazine, he was interested in it, and it based some concerns about what All Aboard Florida is facing. And the title of the article is Private Plan Faces Challenges. Interesting reading. But his comment is, I hope this is successful because I would love to travel to Florida to see and to ride this high-speed train. You know, there are other points of view besides the negative ones towards All Aboard Florida. What we do not have as private citizens or people who want to see this take place in our community is the political action group behind us that's primarily funded by real estate agents out of the Jensen Beach area. And most of the arguments that were rebutted by the president tonight were facts that misinformation had been brought up by a group that's been fighting this from day one. It came out of nowhere. It's been a constant fight to try to get the truth into the public. Figures don't lie, but people can make figures do whatever they want to do. Last, I don't want to take too much time, so I want to cut this short. I won't go through the entire list, but I do want to read my 17th bullet. The previous document gave 15 benefits to the city of Vero Beach in particular, or the county, for having a stop for All Aboard Florida in this county. The 17th one is a new one, and it might surprise some people, and it's something that should be considered and not just waved off, and that is alternative travel possibilities. I'm talking about shifting paradigms here. Let me read this. This is the way it'll appear in the record. Young people are not interested in driving as much anymore. I have talked with a former Georgia Tech PhD whose specialty is transportation engineering. He is now with the Department of Energy's Argonne Labs of Chicago. Much has been made in the media about car sales to young people. He confirmed to me that young people are not as interested in owning cars anymore. He said the big automobile companies are having a very difficult time trying to market automobiles to the younger generation. I have talked with other young people in Vero Beach who feel this way as well. They don't particularly want to own a car. They too express an interest in using trains versus automobiles. The younger generation seem to be quite interested in the prospect of high-speed rail in Florida and the Treasure Coast. Some have argued their position to the Indian River County Commission, with not much success, I might add, and to the Vero Beach Press-Journal newspaper. That's basically all I really want to say tonight.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am, come right up. Please state your name and address for the record. Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Susan Seidler. You want my address?
Yes, ma'am.
1825 21st Avenue, Vero Beach, Florida. I'm going to read this. I'm not used to doing this kind of thing, so forgive me. We have lived in the beautiful, safe, quiet town of Vero Beach for many years. We chose to move here because of those features. Now AAF is preparing to change the quality of life for all residents of our town. Here are some of my concerns. As senior citizens, we moved here knowing that if either one of us needed emergency transportation to the hospital, an ambulance would get us there in a very few minutes. I can testify that a while back I was rushed to the hospital across the train tracks in under 15 minutes from the 911 call to my arrival in the ER. My heart was stopping, and any delay might have cost me my life. 2 additional trains every hour over and above the freight trains, with resulting backup of waiting lines of cars, would probably have spared all of you from having to listen to me today. I'm concerned about all the emergency services, police, fire, and ambulances, that will be disrupted by these additional AAF high-speed trains. And by the way, out of what I've written, what I've learned today is that these high-speed trains are going to cost our city and our county a lot of money. I had no idea about that. And I'm concerned about that. And we gain nothing from these trains, nothing at all. Okay. In Sunday's paper, in the Press Journal, August 10th, Mr. Del Vecchio suggested AAF submit their proposed train schedule, including the freight train schedule, to Vero Beach so that we can test the system during high season for a couple of days or more, including the lowering and raising of gates, to see what the impact will be for our town. Let's get the data and let's learn what disruptions these additional trains will cause and see how our citizens will be affected. That's not a lot to ask. I don't know if any of you have ever played on the railroad tracks as youngsters. I did. We would find a place where we were not easily spotted, put our ears down on the track to listen for the oncoming train. Then we would place whatever coins we happened to have on the tracks and watch the wheels go over the coins and flatten them out. That was a pretty dangerous game we played then. I'm sure that there are children playing the same game today. Imagine what might happen with AAF high-speed trains barreling down the track. If you've ever ridden a high-speed train in Europe, you would have seen that the tracks are fenced for their entire length to prevent access by people and animals. Here in the USA, Amtrak's Acela tracks are partially fenced and are fully fenced while traveling through suburban and urban areas to protect people, especially children and animals, from wandering onto the track and possibly causing themselves or even the passengers harm with a sudden, unexpected emergency stop. To what extent will AAF fence in their tracks? I have seen no mention of fencing, even in congested areas such as Vero Beach. How does AAF intend to protect their tracks from trespassers, and especially animals? Indian River County is a big cattle raising area. We live about 10 blocks from the railroad tracks, and we are able to clearly hear the freight whistles at 4 different railroad crossings. My understanding is that AAF plans on running 16 round trips a day. That's 32 trains passing through, or I believe 2 trains an hour for 16 hours a day. If the whistles are no louder than the freight train whistles, we would hear another 128 whistles a day. That would be awful. If the whistles will be louder, as I understand they will need to be, it will severely impact our quality of life as well as our health. It would severely lower the value of our home and of hundreds of the homes in our communities. 2 trains an hour sounds innocuous, but when you consider that we have 9 crossings in just over 1 mile, we will probably hear the train whistles at all these crossings because they will be much louder. Therefore, we will hear the whistle blow 288 times every day. This schedule would limit freight trains to night travel, interrupting our sleep as well. We'd do better living on one of the New York City elevated train lines. I would not receive a single benefit in return for all the problems that AAF would be causing our community, economically with the lowering of our property values and the loss of tourism that would follow. The loss of tourism will affect our local businesses that depend on tourists. Our snowbirds will look for rentals without those annoyances, probably further north. The undermining of our health and safety by delaying emergency services would certainly not be a benefit either. There is absolutely no reason for us to be in favor of having this troublesome high-speed railroad going through our community. It is not even providing us with additional public transportation that so many of our residents who cannot afford cars need. I would like this statement included in the environmental impact statement. Thank you for allowing me this time.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Sir, would you like to respond to some of the questions? It's up to you.
Sure.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'd like to quickly.
Yes, sir.
I jotted a couple to try to keep up. First of all, there's maybe something with regard to train horns and quiet zones that would be a little instructive for everybody really to understand, because we talked about it a little bit earlier, and we, for the most part, got it right, but not entirely. We talked about the safety improvements that we are going to be instituting and paying for entirely as a part of our program. That's absolutely factual. It does not mean that we are therefore alleviated of the responsibility by federal law to blow our horns. We can neither ask for that or not do that. That is a request that needs to be made by a local community, and to the extent that there are any other improvements other than the ones that are going to be put in place that are necessary to replace the safety configurations that the train would otherwise serve, those obligations typically go to whoever it was, the community that requested the institution of that quiet zone. Here's the thing. The truth of the matter is that virtually all of the investments necessary to achieve the safety standards to make quiet zones possible are already going to be made, and those improvements are already going to be in place as a result of us just doing what we're committed to doing with the safety improvements.
What safety improvements?
There are a range of things associated with the safety improvements, and they have to do with medians and guard gates and fencing configurations and alteration of sidewalks and warning devices and alarms. There is no simple one-size-fits-all solution to that. I will tell you, and I think the gentleman will attest that participated in the grade crossing diagnostic, it is in fact a very tedious thing. These notions of sealed corridors, I wish they were a simple black and white objective thing like a menu. They are not. They are a series of recommendations with a range of options that address all kinds of situations. Every single one of these grade crossings, as is the case with every grade crossing in every railroad system in America, is like a snowflake. No two of them are the same. You have to take each of them individually, and from the range of possible solutions that are available, reconcile the best possible set of configurations that will arrive at the safety profile that the jurisdictional agencies impose on you. It's also important to note, and I'm sure the gentleman will concur, that sometimes those jurisdictional agencies have points of view and or requirements that don't jive with one another. And they need to come up with a mitigated circumstance where one or the other needs to take precedent over the other one. That is the tedious nature of these grade crossing improvements. The reality of it is, for the first phase of our project, that entire process has been completed, and all of those improvements have now been agreed to by all the jurisdictional agencies, and our design team is moving forward with the engineering solution for that system, all of which we are paying for. The important point is this. In the coming days, you're going to learn about a very important outcome with regard to quiet zones. We have been actively engaged with the communities south of here that are part and parcel of our first phase, pursuant to something that they've been very interested in getting, which is quiet zones, whereby there won't be more horns as a result of our trains running through the communities. There will in fact be no horns as a result of the institution of quiet zones in the community. We would very much like to engage in that kind of a productive dialogue for the entirety of our corridor, including right here. We believe, because we're shouldering almost all, if not all, yet to be determined, but we know virtually all of the financial burden necessary to achieve quiet zones is going to be shouldered by our company in what we are already proposing to do, and because of that, we are very, very close to achieving that significant benefit that would affect everybody in the area. So that was a bit of a long-winded area. The topic of quiet zones is a complex topic that we've invested enormous energy in. It is a very significant benefit, we think, to everybody, and so I hope that at least in part, clarifies that notion. It also addressed some of the issue of sealed corridor with regard to some of the improvements that we're planning. As I said earlier in my presentation, the duration of the intervention at any grade crossing being less than 45 seconds and a 97% probability that won't happen is why we believe that the issues concerning safety vehicles and those sorts of things being impacted as along with the rest of the traffic flow in the system is really an issue that we understand the derivation of the concern, but really shouldn't be a concern just because of the reality of the characteristics associated with what is going to happen. The data that you asked for to be included so that you can see it is all entirely going to be part and parcel of the information that is provided with the draft environmental impact statement. So in fact, you will have access to all of that information so that you can study it. I will assure you it says what I said it says because we produce the data, but you will absolutely have to see it. And lastly, please don't play on the railroad.
I have one quick question for you, sir.
Yes, sir.
What do you mean by warning alarms? Do you mean the bells where the red lights are?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have one question too. The quiet zones seem to be somewhat of a bone of contention for lots of reasons. In terms of scale, do you have a guess as to what the cost in total would be for you to add that extra, whatever it is? You're paying 95%, 97%. Yeah. What's that extra 2%? If you know what 95 is.
Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, I don't know the answer to that question yet because, again, the details of each of these individual configurations has not been concluded. We just got through the diagnostic. What I can say is this. There were estimates of the costs associated with grade crossings that were made by public authorities and others for the first phase of our project. And they sought funding from various sources, the MPO, grants from the government, et cetera, in order to aggregate the money necessary against what they thought their rightful share of those improvements were going to be. There were published numbers that exceeded $45 million for the 67 miles in our first phase. The truth of the situation at the end of the day, that the gap, the piece that will be funded by others than ourselves, is going to be single-digit millions.
So if you could then, if All Aboard Florida could make a business decision to throw in a couple of million. You're talking about $1.5 billion worth of loans. If you could throw an extra $10 million at the project and have all of the areas designed for a quiet zone, so that all a community would have to do is say, yeah, stop beeping in our community, the infrastructure would be there. It seems to me you would end a considerable faction of opposition by a relatively small, in comparison, amount of money.
So is your argument that $1 billion here, $1 billion there, pretty soon you're talking about real?
No. My argument is that there's real concerns about the noise, about the quiet zones, and it seems to me when you talk about you're already doing 95% or whatever the number is, that there might be a number there that makes sense.
Listen, again, in all of our work to date, we've been accommodating in going the extra mile to take advantage of every extra dollar of investment that we can to exact, sort of multiple streams of benefit, as evidenced by the fact that a $45 million estimate in reality turned out to be single-digit millions. That money didn't go away, right? It didn't go away. It got moved onto our side of the ledger, and we found a way to absorb that additional investment in the context of the remainder of our project. What I'm suggesting to you is that is our approach to the remainder of the corridor, and I think as we stand here today that there's going to be, on a relative basis, the same sort of outcome with respect to quiet zones for those communities that are desirous of that outcome and are willing to engage with us to sort of make that happen.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the general public like to speak? Yes, ma'am. Yes. Wait, we have a lady that hasn't spoke yet, if you'd be so kind. Come right up, ma'am. And please state your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon, Melinda Meikle, 1612 West Camino del Rio, Vero Beach. And I just have an off-the-cuff comment I'd like to make. I've been in opposition to the train for a number of reasons. Not that I don't like trains. I used to commute on the train. The New York City and New England corridor, those are successful trains because they have the captive audience. They have 75% of the train travel in America is in that area. So we're in a little bit different situation here. But what I wanted to ask All Aboard Florida, and knowing the clever people that they are, wouldn't it be such a great thing to bring the railroad and move it from West Palm to go directly to Orlando? Now, I know they say they own the track here, which they do, and they make money on the freight here. But wouldn't it be great to make a deal with the CSX tracks and make that and avoid all the liability that I know big companies try to avoid? Because there will be liability going through these small towns because the environment is going to be dramatically impacted. And say you have one accident or something like that, it could wipe out a whole company. So I'm just wondering why that isn't a consideration. I know when I was reading about the 2010 stimulus package, they were considering 2 avenues, and one of those was going along the thruway. So it was considered. In fact, there was an environmental impacts study that was done for 2 avenues, and I think the thruway was one of the considerations. So I'm just wondering if that wouldn't be something that could be considered.
All right, thank you. Sir, would you like to address that from All Aboard Florida, the president?
It really is a pretty straightforward answer to that question. As I said in my presentation, for 200 of the 235 miles of our route, we own the infrastructure. We own that property. It is private property. On that private property, there has been the benefit of over 100 years of infrastructure investment placed into that ground. It is highly maintained and operated on literally every single day since it was put into operation, I think, in 1896. What that means is the capital cost required to add the additional infrastructure into the system in order for us to operate these trains and charge a fare against the debt and equity that we have to pay back is benefited by that century of previous investment and the simple fact that we already own those assets. We don't own the corridor to the west. That infrastructure would not support the kind of operation that our system would require. Therefore, the fundamental economics of operating on that right-of-way are completely different than the operating economics that are available to us as a result of the utilization of our private property. That's why we can, in fact, do this in a way that nobody else in the United States can do, which is to do this without requiring any public sector subsidies against that operation. Every other single proposition remotely like this in the country requires those operating subsidies because the magnitude of the investment necessary to put the system in place cannot be sustained by the operating economics of the passenger counts that can be carried by those systems. It really is that simple.
Okay.
I would also like to make one other really important point, which is there was a point of confusion there about our railroad and the operating freight railroad. It is another point of confusion that we hear all the time. You need to understand that the freight railroad that exists today and is operating every single day is an entirely different company from All Aboard Florida. We don't own them, they don't own us. We happen to share rights to the infrastructure and the corridor. They have their own management team. It's an entirely separate, legally structured company. We have no beneficial outcome from any of their businesses, and they have no beneficial outcome from any of our businesses. We don't share revenues. We don't do any of those sorts of things. It is Ford and General Motors. We are completely and totally separate companies. The only thing that we have in common is we both happen to operate railroads. They operate a freight railroad. We will operate a passenger railroad.
Okay, thank you.
And you wouldn't consider doing
Yeah,
that?
you have to come up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. I didn't know that. Melinda Meikle, 1612 West Camino Deer. I didn't know that they were two different companies, but wouldn't that make the argument for sharing with CSX and being an independent entity, and they're an independent entity, and you share the tracks? Wouldn't that be, as opposed to liability, wouldn't that be something to consider?
All right, thank you.
Again, the simple answer to that is no.
You have to.
We own the assets.
People can't hear you out in TV land.
CSX owns its corridor. We own our corridor. So it's our private property. And they have no obligation, incentive, desire for us to be operating on their corridor. It would require a deal and a massive investment on our part. The magnitude of that investment would make it an infeasible business proposition.
All right. We had somebody else that wanted to come back up. Do you want to come back up again, sir? It's up to you. State your name and address again for the record, please.
I'm Donald Hood from 440th Court Southwest. I have a question for Mr. President. There was some talk about working with the marine people who are having concerns about the bridge closures and possible applications to let them know when the trains were coming so the closures of the bridges would be a benefit to those trying to use the waterways. The question I would have, isn't there something like that then that the FEC, All Aboard Florida would have for emergency vehicles, that they could track train movements and know what the possible impact would be? It would seem to me like that'd be a great benefit and should negate the whole problem of trains at the crossings. If you can tell where they are for the bridges for the boats, you should be able to tell where they are for the crossings for emergency vehicles. So that would be that's my question.
Mr. President from All Aboard Florida would like to address that question.
It's an interesting notion. The only thing that comes to my mind in that discussion is that if you have an approaching emergency vehicle coming to an intersection, and if the notion is sort of like you could with a traffic light control the flow of the traffic light because of the oncoming emergency vehicle, there's just one potential flaw with that, which is you can't stop a train that's traveling at 40 or 50 or 60 or 100 miles an hour in the kind of condition that you could, a motor vehicle. So that the schedule would be widely known, but you just don't have the same kind of flexibility.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the general public like to address the commission? If not, we'll move on to Chairman's Matters, I received an email letter from a Mr. Robert D. Webster that he would like to be read into the record. Ms. Vaughn, our city clerk, will read it into the record, and she'll state his address at the end of the letter. Go ahead, ma'am.
I attended the last meeting of the Vero Beach High-Speed Rail Commission in June 2014 and would be present for the August 11th meeting if I were in Vero Beach. Unfortunately, I am out of state and cannot attend this meeting in person. In my absence, I've prepared the following comments for the Vero Beach High-Speed Rail Commission and would appreciate if they were read and entered into the public record at the August 11th, 2014 meeting. A proclamation was submitted and read to the Vero Beach High-Speed Rail Commission at its June 30th, 2014 meeting, claiming, among other things, all aboard Florida will diminish the quality of life, hinder access to public services such as schools, libraries, community centers, parks, as well as delivery of essential emergency services such as fire, EMS, ambulance, and police services. Enjoy taxpayers' funding of all aboard Florida. Expect local taxpayers to bear much of the cost of railroad crossing improvements, safety upgrades, installation of quiet zones. Require taxpayer funding to mitigate the costs necessary to protect Florida businesses and neighborhoods from noise, personal safety concerns, and expected environmental damage caused by increasing train traffic. These are common threads found in objector statements, petitions, and proclamations opposing the All Aboard Florida high-speed rail project. These allegations are based on fears, not facts. Objectors often claim that All Aboard Florida is really all about freight, a proposition that cannot withstand the light of serious scrutiny that renders the claim both implausible and without foundation. Let's examine the 5 claims above that appeared in the proclamation read on June 30th, 2014. 1. Quality of life. No evidence is presented to support the blanket claim of harm. No consideration is given to the likelihood that a future Vero Beach Transit Station will serve both residents and visitors by offering a convenient alternative to driving the congested I-95, Florida 528, and Florida Turnpike corridors to travel between Vero Beach and destinations in Orlando, Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami. The existence of AAF will diminish traffic on congested intercity roadways while providing an alternative for travel to cities served by AAF and its connections. 2. Access to public facilities and emergency services. The closure time at any crossing to allow a 900-foot AAF transit to pass at 110 miles per hour is roughly 45 seconds. 30 seconds to gates to descend, 5 seconds for the transit to clear the crossing, 10 seconds for gates to fully open. This is roughly comparable to encountering a red traffic light. It certainly fails to rise to the level of deprivation of enjoyment of public institutions and services as claimed. 3. Taxpayer funding. There is no taxpayer funding for this project. The Federal Railroad Administration administers the Railroad Rehabilitation and Improvement Financing Program. The RRIF program was established by the Transportation Equity Act for the 21st century and amended by the Safe, Accountable, Flexible, and Efficient Transportation Equity Act, a legacy for users. Under this program, the FRA administrator is authorized to provide direct loans and loan guarantees up to $35 billion to finance development of railroad infrastructure. The RRIF program uses a mix of public and private funding for loans issued at market rates. In the event of loan default, private funding of RRIF loans is guaranteed by taxpayer funds. A search of the FRA website found no instance of any RRIF loan default in the history of the program. While collateral is not required for RRIF loans, collateral is being offered by AAF, and based on the assessment of the extent to which that collateral reduces risk, the loan's market rate will be adjusted to reflect the risk of default. Some claim that the difference between the cost of private equity bond funding at higher rates than the RRIF loan amounts to public subsidies. This claim is without serious foundation as it ignores the fundamental differences between collateralized loans and bonds. A bond is not a loan is not a bond. 4. Quiet zone cost. It should be abundantly clear by now that the significant cost to bring road crossings up to sealed corridor compliance will be borne by AAF. The cost for quiet zone designation will generally be the one-time cost to install warning signs that horns will not sound, plus a request to the FRA for a quiet zone crossing designation. Maintenance of public road crossings has always been the obligation of the governmental entity responsible for that road, as it should be. It will remain the obligation of the public. However, I understand that AAF will perform all crossing maintenance at their expense for the first 5 years after upgrades have been made. 5. Taxpayer costs to protect the public from AAF. Given the cost for safety measures required for sealed corridor compliance will be borne by AAF, this claim is without merit. There is no evidence that the operations of AAF will require any additional police, fire, EMS, or other public expenditures for public safety. In summary, these objector claims are based on fear propagated by misinformation. Finally, whenever I encounter objectors, I ask them 2 simple questions. These are questions this commission should be prepared to answer. They are: what governmental entity has approval jurisdiction over the proposed AAF high-speed rail project? With which specific laws or regulations governing such projects upon which the approving entity must base its decision does the AAF proposal fail to comply? Failure to have clear answers to these questions must necessarily doom to failure any effort to prevent the project from moving forward. Respectively submitted, Robert D. Webster, 2881 St. Bart's Square, Vero Beach, Florida, 32967.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk, for reading that into the record. It was a little on the lengthy side. Okay, that's it under my matters. I'll move to members' matters. Do our members have any concerns that they would like to bring to the table? Okay, with that being said, we're to number 7. The next meeting date is September 29th at 4 p.m., October 27th at 4 p.m. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Thank you very much for coming.